No emulators were used in the production of this podcast.
That's awesome, sweetie. Thank you.
This is the Atari Jaguar Game by Game podcast, where we take a good long look at Atari's last home video game console and its library, one game at a time. Whether you're new to the Jaguar, a longtime fan, or a longtime hater, I'm glad you're here. Welcome. I'm your host and pinball wizard Shinto, and to tell you the truth, I rather stink at pinball, but I'm still ready to pull back the plunger on part number J0144, Pinball Fantasies. Pinball Fantasies is a 2 MB cartridge, a pinball simulator for 1 to 8 alternating players, originally developed by Digital Illusions CE for 21st Century Entertainment, ported to the Jaguar by Spidersoft, and distributed by C-West around the second quarter of 1995. Digital Illusions is a game development studio which started out in Sweden, founded by members of a demo group called The Silence. The Silence were originally a Commodore 64 demo team started in 1987, but quickly moved on to the Amiga, which is where they spent most of their time. I see 3 demos on the Atari ST at demozoo.org, but the rest of them, dozens, are on the Amiga. So, 4 of the Silence founded Digital Illusions. These 4 were students at Växjö University, so you can say the company basically started out of a dorm room, because it did. Digital Illusions CE, more commonly DICE or DICE, continued on until 2006 when it was officially acquired by Electronic Arts, and they're still in operation today as EA DICE, with offices in Stockholm and Los Angeles, developing games like the Battlefield series, as well as Star Wars Battlefront. Andrew Hewson started a company called Hewson Consultants in 1980. He had been working at the British Museum for several years, learning how to program their new Hewlett-Packard computer, and then moved over to the National Environment Research Council, and his boss there introduced him to the new Sinclair ZX80. Mr. Hewson thought it sounded like a lousy machine until he heard the price, and then went out to get one. The machine got him started in his own business, but as his company grew, they started releasing games for the Amstrad CPC, Commodore 64, BBC Micro, Atari ST, and DOS, among other platforms. Some other notable titles include Nebulous, better known, to me at least, as Tower Toppler, a game I enjoyed on my Atari 7800. There is also Firelord and Stormlord, Paradroid, Alley Cat, Synapse, and many others. Moby Games lists 70 titles published by Hewson Consultants. But by 1991, Hewson Consultants had to shut down, unable to match pace with the increased development costs and, in general, the changing landscape for game development and publishing. Not long after liquidation, though, he was approached by investors with an offer to fund a new game development and publishing company. Well supported and in search of a new niche to exploit, 21st Century Entertainment was founded. That brings us back to Digital Illusions, who had been developing a pinball game, an early version of which they showed 21st Century Entertainment at the 1990 European Computer Trade Show in London, and a more complete version the following year. The Bitmap brothers and their publisher Renegade, who were also at this show, they didn't see much sales potential in pinball games, But this is exactly what 21st Century was looking for, so they signed up Digital Illusions and released Pinball Dreams on the Amiga computer in March of 1992. Pinball Dreams actually got its start in 1988. A Danish member of the Silence named Mikael Ball had drawn some pinball tables which were larger than the screen, which required some scrolling. The members of the Silence forming Digital Illusions saw potential in the unused images, and being big pinball fans in real life, decided to pursue it. Pinball Dreams ended up containing 4 tables, realistic ball physics, and awesome Pro Tracker module music written by Olaf Gustafsson. So, Pinball Dreams was big, really big, one of the top-selling games on the Amiga with a reported 650,000 copies sold. It would be ported to DOS the following year, and then subsequent ports to the Super Nintendo, Game Boy, and Game Gear, though the portable versions only had 3 tables instead of 4. What about a version for the Atari computers? Well, they tried. They hired someone to port the game from the Amiga to the Atari, but a few days in and they couldn't keep it from crashing. Stuart Gilray, who had become a producer at 21st Century, took a look and found an Amiga mouse call that, of course, wouldn't work on the ST, and that fixed the crashing. But this game didn't see release until early or middle 1995, when 1632 Systems published it for the Atari Falcon. Yeah, the Falcon. ST Format magazine took issue with that, saying that the game could have easily run on an STE. But if you're lucky enough to have a Falcon computer, you can download this game for free. The copyright holders have released it free of charge, and the link is in the show notes. After the success and market demand for Pinball Dreams, 21st Century commissioned another pinball game, Pinball Fantasies, released on the Amiga toward the end of 1992. This one also had 4 tables and great music, and would be ported to a number of systems, including the Amiga CD32, DOS, Super Nintendo, Game Boy, this time with all 4 tables. Oh yeah, and the Atari Jaguar too, which is why we're here. But skipping ahead, most sources indicate 21st Century Entertainment didn't actually make it to the 21st century, with the company dissolving in 2000. But if you want to be pedantic about it, the actual date of dissolution was May 28th, 2001. So technically, yeah, they made it to the 21st century. In 2009, a development studio out of Finland called Cowboy Rodeo released versions of Pinball Dreams and Pinball Fantasies for the iPhone and PlayStation Portable. The PSP version, part of Sony's PlayStation Minis program, would later work on the PlayStation 3 console and Vita handheld. The iOS versions currently sell for $3 each, and over in PlayStation Land they go for $7 each. In 2012, a version of these games was released on the Migo Hermatten platform. Don't know what Migo is? It was a mobile phone platform that was only ever released on one device, the Nokia N9. I happen to own one of these devices, maybe I'll talk more about it during story time, and I did see these games in the App Store, the OV stores is called, starting at $5 and eventually dropping to $3. I didn't buy it at the time, and now I'm thinking I really should have, because there's no way to get it now, and even though I still have my N9. Nobody seems to have the Deb package anymore, at least not without visiting some really shady sites out there. But that's off topic. There was an HD version of Pinball Fantasies released toward the end of 2012 on iOS only. They look sort of like 3D rendered versions of the classic tables, which is kind of neat. I can't find much information on Cowboy Rodeo. Their official website went dark years ago, at least 2016, possibly sooner. Hopefully they still got a cut of the PlayStation version of Pinball Fantasies I bought to help research this episode. Hey, do you know from whom Cowboy Rodeo licensed these games? I found this very interesting. Rebellion, of Alien vs. Predator and Checkered Flag and Skyhammer, but mostly Alien vs. Predator fame, they acquired the rights to these games. Now, when this transaction occurred, what the scope was, and whether or not they still own the rights to these games, I wasn't able to find that out. I sent some requests out to those who should know, but I didn't hear back by recording time, unfortunately. In 2013, 21st Century Entertainment was reincorporated. The company records seem to indicate a state of dormancy, but what isn't dormant is Hewson Consultants, reincorporated about the same time by Andrew Hewson himself. That's right, he's back in the game of making games with his son Rob and with John Ogden. Huey Games is the name. They're working on new games basically as well as partnering with other development teams. Titles include the back-and-forth shooter Hyper Sentinel, adventure game Mystery of Woolly Mountain, and the steampunk-themed Mechanus. A couple of these you may have seen on Kickstarter. So that's the general history of these companies. Let's take a closer look at the Jaguar. But first, there is so much great music in this game, I feel like I'm starting to fall behind. I'll talk, no tunes. So how about another brief interlude? I try to keep the music segments in this podcast to about a minute, maybe a minute and a half. So let's give that a try now. Porting this game over to the Jaguar was done by Spidersoft, a development company based in Lincoln, England. 21st Century Entertainment was a 60% owner of Spidersoft, so they used this team to port their titles to other platforms, but Spidersoft was also able to work with other publishers. This is kind of interesting. Spidersoft had a ROM emulator that they designed in-house. This was a box which connected to a PC over a parallel cable and contained some RAM. They would upload the game images, whatever they were working on, from the PC to the box, which was called ESYS, E-S-Y-S, and there were different interface cards which could be used to plug into the cartridge port on all sorts of different consoles. 8 and 16-bit systems, even one 64-bit system called the Atari Jaguar. Uploading their code into the ESYS box for the Jaguar version were developers Chris Jones and Martin McKenzie. This pair also worked together on later titles like Grand Theft Auto 1 and 2, a couple Austin Powers games for the Game Boy Color, and other pinball titles like Kiss Pinball for the PlayStation. Robert Lever, or Lever, sorry, I don't know which, or Lever, I'll just call you Bob. Can I call you Bob? He worked on updated graphics for the game for the Jaguar version, and some of his other credits include Cliffhanger for multiple platforms and Hook on the Game Gear before he moved into quality assurance and producer roles. Spidersoft was officially dissolved around the same time as 21st Century Entertainment, but the Lincoln-based studio lived on as Tarantula Studios. They obviously like their arachnids. And in 2002, they became Rockstar Lincoln, a Rockstar of Grand Theft Auto fame, where they exist to this day. The Atari Jaguar version of Pinball Fantasies was distributed by California-based C-West, also known as Computer West, the publishing arm of Pacific Software Supply, a longtime Atari distributor, who was, at least at one point, the largest Atari distributor in North America. Even so, there was not a lot of information to be found about Pacific Software Supply. The company started out in or before 1980 and lasted through the end of the Jaguar, apparently morphing into companies called Bits of Fun and later Go Atari. In the August 1993 issue of Atari Explorer Online, Peter Curry of Pacific Software Supply put out a call for software developers, offering to publish their games with a particular focus on the Atari Falcon computer. They can do box art, manuals, printing, and of course distribution. This was the first mention of C-West that I could find. C-West of course didn't limit themselves to the Falcon, they also worked on the Jaguar, doing art for telegames and getting Pinball Fantasies out the door. The game had to take a couple passes through Atari quality control, though, before it was approved. Exiting an individual table with the option button and then seeing the menu with what the A, B, and C buttons do, that was a late feature, apparently. I'm going to talk about all these later. And they changed it so that in the table preview mode, pressing A, B, or C would immediately result in the text, select number of players with buttons 1 through 8 to scroll across the dot matrix display. Those are helpful additions, I think. The game went off to production around February of 1995 and was released around March or April. Or May or June, it's kind of hard to tell. Pinball Fantasies is a simulator of physical pinball machines. It's not based on any real-life tables, but follows the same rules and contains many of the same elements you'd find on an actual machine. If you are totally unfamiliar with pinball, which is... well, let me back up a bit. This is kind of a sidebar and may include some slight ranting. There is a common phrase out there in the English language, American English especially, that I really dislike. Back in the day has nothing on this. I don't like when I hear the phrase, unless you've been living under a rock, which is followed by some topic of which the speaker is intimately aware, and therefore assumes everyone else knows the same thing, and anyone who does not know this thing, lives under a rock. So, as in, unless you've been living under a rock, you basically know how a pinball machine works. I know that's not literal, at least I hope it's not meant literally, but more like a metaphor meaning someone who is out of touch with the rest of the world. But I did a quick web search for that specific phrase, and while, yes, I did know about many of these things, there were quite a few that I didn't know anything about, and the assumption that lack of knowledge about foam rollers or LuLaRoe leggings or the volatility of General Electric stock or what Saraha is, the assumption that not knowing something within your own particular knowledge bubble somehow makes me less than a functioning member of society is insulting and mostly inaccurate. So I won't presume that you know something simply because I do, and I certainly won't insult you if you don't. That's not fair or accurate either. There is a popular webcomic by Randal Monroe called XKCD. One of these comics, and I'll link to it in the show notes, is called 10,000, where the author postulates that every day around 10,000 adults in the United States are hearing about something for the first time. So on that note, let's talk about what pinball is. In general terms, to go over some of the basic elements of a pinball machine that you may also find in this video game simulation of pinball. Also, I'm not super knowledgeable about pinball myself, so this is a good refresher for me as well. Imagine a long, flat table tilted up at a slight angle, say around 6 or 7 degrees in the back. Along the right edge of this table, you have a plunger, a spring-loaded pull knob, that when pulled back releases a shiny metal ball up onto the table. There are many components and things on this table that the ball will hit, bounce off, be guided through as gravity pulls the ball back toward you at the bottom of the table. In the center of the table at the bottom, there's a passageway off the table, commonly called a drain, where the machine will reclaim the ball. But to protect the drain, you control a pair of flippers, little paddles on either end of the drain, but don't necessarily protect it entirely. There's a gap in the middle between the flippers. Buttons on either side of the table will actuate the respective flippers, left or right, launching the nearby ball back up into the features of the table. Your goal is to score points by keeping the ball in play, and as your skills improve, you can even target specific goals, get some aiming in there, completing sequences to open up new scoring opportunities, and really rack up the points. That's pinball in a nutshell, and I apologize if it's overly simplistic, but so am I when it comes to this type of game. As I said, the features of the tables in Pinball Fantasies mimic those found on real-life machines, so let's go over some of those features. The plunger launches the ball down a chute, sometimes called a launch lane, and out into the playfield. They're usually spring-loaded, these plungers, and you can control how far back you pull it, giving you the ability to adjust the speed and maybe entry point of the ball. In fact, there's a feature called a skill shot, where you get bonus points for getting the ball through a certain feature just after launch. These can be a specific objective, sometimes indicated by a rapidly flashing rollover target or a certain ramp that you need to immediately launch the ball into. On one of the tables in Pinball Fantasies, I get the skill shot by nudging the table. Imagine bumping the whole pinball machine to try to adjust the trajectory of the ball. There's a button to do that in this game on the Jaguar. It's kind of a limited use thing. Real pinball machines contain what's called a tilt sensor to penalize you for nudging the table too much. Picture a pendulum surrounded by a conductive ring. If the pendulum moves so much that the stem comes in contact with the ring, the circuit completes and the game enters tilt mode, where your controls are locked out, you get no points for any targets you hit. You're basically stuck waiting for the ball to drain. Pinball Fantasies simulates this sensor. I'm not going to go through these components in any order, so let's talk about bumpers next. These are round objects, sometimes called mushrooms because of their distinctive shape, that when hit with a ball will forcefully knock the ball more or less back the way it came. In Pinball Fantasies, you'll find these bumpers in groups of 3 or 4, and you get points for bumper contact, so the ball can get knocked around to cluster a bit from bumper to bumper, earning you points for really not doing anything, and for a low-skill player like me, is much appreciated. Similar to bumpers are slingshots. These are usually triangular, raised objects down near the bottom of the table, above and to the sides of the flippers. If the ball hits the hypotenuse, I guess these aren't technically right-angled triangles, so maybe the term hypotenuse doesn't apply. They're kind of close, and my high school geometry teacher, he can mark me down retroactively if he wants. So if it hits the hypotenuse or the long side of the triangle, the slingshot will launch the ball away, angled inward and toward the table. There are stationary targets, I think they're called stand-ups, and if the ball hits one of these, an adjacent letter or something lights up. And at least in Pinball Fantasies, all the tables here contain these. Often, lighting up all the letters, forming a word, will complete a sequence. Another type of letter sequence completion can be found on all the Pinball Fantasies tables, where the flippers actually control which letters are illuminated. When you light up at least one, for example getting a ball through a rollover target, you can cycle which letter is lit by using the left and right flippers. By anticipating where the ball is about to go, you can place the unlit letter there before it arrives and more quickly complete that sequence. There are lanes, often but not always made out of wire, which are raised above the table and can carry the ball across the playfield and over the bumpers and targets and stuff, and usually ramps that lead up to the rails. There are side lanes, inner and outer. The outer lanes can drain without flippers to protect them, but under certain conditions can catch and release the ball. Inner lanes deposit the ball on a path which leads directly to the flippers. The tables in Pinball Fantasies include a center pin between the two flippers at the bottom, and if the ball falls straight down in the middle, it can bounce off of the center pin and keep the game going. On some pinball machines, that is an option that you unlock, but here in Pinball Fantasies, it's always there. And finally, there are sinkholes, which can hold the ball temporarily, and the game may or may not release the ball automatically. All of these targets and ramps and bumpers and stuff exist on a playfield filled with indicator lights that show how your game is progressing, and Pinball Fantasies has a simulated dot matrix display, a grid of lights showing messages and animations. There's a score counter built up by all participating players during a game called the Jackpot, which is reset after it's awarded. And you get a chance at an extra ball after you lose your last one. The dot matrix display will show the second to the last digit of your score, the tens place, and at the same time will flash random numbers, landing on one of them. If it matches, you are awarded an extra ball and can continue playing where you left off. This can only happen once per game. You can also earn an extra ball by setting the new high score on a table, as well as various in-game criteria, and it's possible, at least on some tables, to shoot again if the ball drains too quickly. The Partyland table is generous with this. Many real-life pinball machines have a multi-ball feature, 2 or more balls in play at the same time, but Pinball Fantasies does not have this. Thought I'd point that out. One more element I'd like to mention before I start talking about the tables themselves is that all of these tables have their own bonus counter. Completing a certain task increases this counter. It starts at 2 and goes up from there, and gives you some additional points after you drain the ball, every time, as a multiple of 100,000. This bonus counter goes by a different name on each table: Cyclones, Miles, Skills, and Screams, but it's cumulative, so if you, for example, build up 14 of them on your first ball, you get 14 times 100,000 when you drain, so 1.4 million more points after each ball. It's the gift that keeps on giving. Let's go through the 4 tables available in Pinball Fantasies, and for each one I'll give a general description of the table along with most of the rules. For comprehensive reference material, you may prefer to look at actual pictures of the tables. There's a link in the show notes to the complete view of the tables in the DOS version. The details may vary slightly from the Jaguar, but the general layout is the same. As for the complete set of rules, there's an excellent reference in GameFAQs that lists all the rules in far more detail than the manual provides, so check out the show notes for that as well. The music you hear in the background is the preview loop for the first table called Partyland. Every table has its own little loop of music before you actually begin while the table is displayed. You can't see the whole table on the screen at once, so the view of the table scrolls up and down while it waits for you to start the game. Once you do, you get the pre-launch music loop. This plays while waiting for a player to launch the ball down the chute. It's a short loop and flows into the main table theme reasonably well. The Partyland table is very colorful, pastel pinks and blues and orange. It has an amusement park theme, and the artwork on the table features a scared-looking guy cresting the top of a roller coaster with tents and a castle in the background. There's a tree off to the left, white puffy clouds against the blue sky, and a giant clown head. If you have a thing against clowns, that's probably going to make you want to choose a new table, but this one has a lot of fun things going on, so it would be a shame to skip it based off of initial impressions alone. There are 4 ramps. One is part of a loop, or orbit I guess it's called, around the outer edge of the table. One ramp accesses the sky ride, one is for the cyclone, and the final one, well, I guess it's more of a tunnel than a ramp, so we'll call it the tunnel. There are 3 bumpers clustered center right, and right next to them is a dragon or demon head. Kinda looks like a scary evil Yoda with big sharp teeth. This can catch the ball, and its eyes flash when it releases it again. A near vertical row of 3 drop targets have pictures of ducks next to them, each with a different letter spelling HIT, H-I-T, that lights up when hit. There's an extra flipper on the left side, which is positioned to launch the ball into either the tunnel or the cyclone, and nestled below it is a sinkhole. Above that extra flipper is an arrow with the words drop zone. Captured balls will exit here. Top center in the sky ride, there are 4 letters that cycle with the flippers, and below each of them is a gate to light up the letter above. These letters spell puke, P-U-K-E, which is delightful. This exits to a wire rail that joins up with the cyclone output and dumps to the right inner lane. There are light-up letters spelling the word crazy and party, and a separate trap called arcade, which lights up when you hit a red button next to it. The background around the word arcade always reminded me of a disembodied brain, and being positioned right above the clown's head just looked wrong. If this didn't look like a brain to you in the past, I'm sorry, it probably does now. Hitting the lit arcade will give you a random award, presented as a slot machine in the dot matrix display. It can award things like 500,000, 1 million, or 5 million points, a letter in the word crazy, enabling an extra ball when you drain out of the side lane, and possibly nothing at all. Those duck targets enable snacks. There are lights for ice cream, soda, and popcorn that can be eaten by hitting that sinkhole under the top flipper. If you land in the sinkhole without any snack slits, the screen will say, hit some ducks first. Getting the ball into the Cyclone's ramp will increment that cumulative end-of-ball bonus. If you get the ball into the Cyclone ramp or the tunnel immediately after launching a new ball, that's a skill shot. If you light up all the letters in the word puke and then shoot the dragon's mouth, you'll get 5 million points, or an extra ball, or the jackpot. The dragon's mouth without puke lit up sounds wrong, but will give you 250,000 points. Sending the ball around the orbit counterclockwise will light up the letters M, A, and D in turn. And each time you spell mad, the next letter of the word crazy lights up. Spelling crazy enables Mega Laugh. Mega Laugh! Mega Laugh! During Mega Laugh, you get 5 million points each for all the ramps and passages for 25 seconds. Lighting up the letters in the word party requires different feats, a different task for each letter. Things like eating all 3 snacks, a counterclockwise loop followed by either a tunnel or cyclone, 2 skyride loop combinations in 10 seconds, and spelling the word puke. But once you complete all the letters in the word party, you enable happy hour mode.
Happy hour!
During happy hour, you get 1 million points for each target, like bumpers and slingshots and stuff, for 25 seconds. The Speed Devils table has an automotive theme. Many of the raised surfaces are yellow on the left, mixing with light blue on the right. A big steering wheel and dashboard dominate the center of the playfield, with a Formula 1 style race car and then a semi-truck above that. There's a right-hand flipper near the top center of the screen. This one is positioned to launch the ball into one of 2 lobes. Off-road on the left, top left edge of the screen, and pit stop on the right. And pit stop is branched into 2 separate sections, one with a sinkhole, and below that, one with 3 rollover targets with flipper-controlled lights containing the letters PIT. Nestled between the 2 lobes is another ramp, a tiny little one called the jump ramp. There is a big loop that starts with a ramp in the mid-right section of the table and snakes around to the inner lane on the bottom right. There's a smaller ramp on the left, entering a loop that's positioned on top of a cluster of 4 bumpers that you access through the off-road lane. 2 sets of 3 drop targets light up the letters BUR and NIN with an apostrophe after the second N. Alright, let's drop a ball into the launch lane and go through some of the rules of Speed Devils. Similar to the word party on the Partyland table, on this one you spell out the word gear, G-E-A-R, each letter by accomplishing a different task. But these are simpler, hitting the ramps for the first 2 letters, and each set of drop targets for the second 2. Each time you spell the word gear, you can increase your position in the race by subsequently hitting the left and right ramps one after another. You start off in 11th place, and your position is tracked by lights on either side of the steering wheel going from 10 up to 1, first place. Spelling out the word pit by hitting those 3 rollover targets and then launching the ball through the off-road ramp in the top left corner of the table, that will increment your bonus multiplier. You have a 6-gear transmission. There are lights 1 through 6 that light up each time you spell the word gear, and reaching 6th gear enables the hold bonus in the pit stop sinkhole. Hold bonus, I believe, locks the current bonus in place, but I could be wrong about that. It seems to be a common pinball term, like I'm supposed to know what this means, but the sources I consulted seem to have some ambiguity on the subject, since different tables can implement the hold bonus in different ways, but basically from what I can tell, it locks multipliers and some other achievements in place for the next ball. Anyway, once you reach first place here in Speed Devils, that enables the jackpot for 20 seconds if you hit the jump ramp, and turbo mode for 25 seconds if you get the pit stop. Turbo mode awards 5 million points for all ramps during those 25 seconds. You earn miles by shooting the left and right ramps. Miles are the name of the multiples of 100,000 points awarded after each ball. After collecting 10 miles, off-road is enabled. During off-road, you get 100,000 points on all targets for 25 seconds. There's a countdown timer in the dot maker's display to apply the pressure. Collecting 20 miles will enable an extra ball by shooting the outer ramp in the top right lobe. There's a light that says X ball. 30 miles lights jump on the mini ramp. Hitting the mini ramp at that time is good for 10 million points, I think. Maybe it's 5 million. I have sources that say both and lack of skill to find out for myself. 40 miles activates off-road again, 50 lights jump again, and they continue alternating back and forth like this every 10 miles. If he hits the left and right ramps and then shoot the jump ramp, that increases the speedometer 1 step. Subsequent ramps give you a multiple of that speed, speed times 1,000, and the speedometer goes from 25 to 300 in increments of 25, shown as lights behind the steering wheel. A back and forth between the 2 miles ramps within 5 seconds will earn you a cool million. You can get bonus parts for your car every other speed increment. There are numbered lights 1 through 5 spread out across the 3 ramps. I'm not quite sure what the car parts do for you, other than flash on a picture of the car at the bottom of the playfield and give you points. It's probably just about the points. There are the spoiler kits, turbocharger, high-speed wing, sports bumpers, and power steering. There's a spark plug light toward the bottom of the flippers, and I haven't been able to figure out what that thing does. It seems to go unmentioned in the manual and all the guides I've found. $1 Billion Game Show is Table 3, and it's not as busy looking as some of the others. The artwork is dominated by a bespectacled silver fox of a game show host wearing a purple coat, reaching out wide to the shoulders of 2 models, a brunette on the left and a somewhat worried-looking blonde on the right. That's our right, not his right. Each of the lovely ladies are holding signs with various lights on them, and between them, in front of the game show host with a massive gleaming smile, is a wheel with various prizes around the outside, a ring of green lights near the center, surrounding the number 1 and the word billion in a red circle. A network of winding wire trails hover over the rest of the table and can be accessed with one of 3 ramps: the loop ramp, the skill ramp, and the prize ramp. The loop ramp is so called because it forms a tight clockwise loop in the middle of the table. The skill ramp has a flashing skill arrow pointing at it, and the prize ramp has a large yellow circle with the words Loop Mill at the entrance. These ramps dump to rails, which have a couple covered diverters to determine which rail the ball will choose depending on certain conditions. In the upper right, there is an extra flipper, a right-hand flipper, positioned to hit the skill ramp and, to a lesser extent, the loop ramp. There are a pair of drop targets above the skill ramp, each with the $sign positioned below it. 3 bumpers are positioned on the left side of the table under the wire rails, and below the middle bumper is a covered sinkhole with the word lock on it, and this is where you go to collect the cash pot. There are 2 unlabeled buttons on the side of this thing, this covered sinkhole, and 2 more buttons can be found over the brunette's head. These don't have lights on them or do anything fancy. That's about it. As I said, pretty sparse, but let's fire up the table and start going through the list of rules to see what we can win here in the $1 Billion Game Show. We'll start with the loop ramp. You can increase your bonus multiplier by knocking the ball into the loop ramp after a left orbit. The loop ramp can also light 5x cash pot, about 5 times the normal cash pot amount, so 2.5 million, for about 15 seconds. This ramp is also where you go for the super jackpot, good for 50 million, which is unlocked for 5 seconds after the jackpot is collected. The skill ramp builds up skills which are multiplied by 100,000 and awarded after each ball. After 6 skills, you get to start Money Mania. This makes all targets worth 500,000. After 12 skills, the extra ball light is lit on the left orbit. After 18 skills, you get Money Mania again, but with the value increased to 1,000,000 points per target. From 24 skills and on, every 6 skills will alternate between a 500,000 and full million Money Mania. The spin wheel light is activated when you hit both of the $sign drop targets. Spinning the wheel will give you a random prize between 25,000 and 5,000,000 points. It can also be used to collect a prize that's lit. The prize ramp, if you hit it more than once in a row, will light the loop mill circle, and from that point on will give you 1,000,000 points each time. When spin wheel or collect prize is lit, then this is the ramp you'll want to hit. The diverter will send the ball straight down the left side to the bottom left corner, there's a sinkhole down there, and the wheel is spun. Prizes are lit by completing certain ramp combos. Prize ramp, then skill ramp will enable the TV, a 72-inch TV with no commercials. In the early 90s, when this game came out, a 72-inch TV must have been considered preposterously big, but today you can walk into Costco and buy a 75-inch TV for well under $2,000. No commercials too, I guess, if you stream all your content. But back to the prizes, they're more ambiguous with the car. A super turbo extra mega cool car, it says. This requires the skill ramp and then the loop ramp. And the trip to beautiful Sweden, as it turns out, which makes sense given the original developers of the game, this is the left orbit followed by the skill ramp. Once you collect that group of 3 prizes, which has to be done on the same ball, the next 3 prizes can be activated. The prize ramp, skill ramp, and right orbit in that order enables the boat, a nice $1 million boat. The prize ramp, loop ramp, and left orbit enables the plane, which is a private jet with crew, so you don't have to fly it yourself. And finally, the house, a huge 50-room mansion, can be lit by shooting the left orbit, the skill ramp, and then the right orbit. Again, all of these have to be done with 1 ball to complete the sequence. Once you have completed the sequence, launch the ball into the lock near the center of the screen to score 1 billion points. That's the sound of me not collecting 1 billion points. Stones and Bones is a 4th and final table in Pinball Fantasies. This has a haunted house sort of theme with monsters and ghosts and things. The playfield background is the front of a mansion with scary things hovering in front. You've got a bat, which is not scary, or a monster. Bats are fascinating mammals and a friend of mankind, though in video games they're universally stereotyped unfairly as, well, jerks, some might say. Right, Ferg?
Because bats, say it with me, are jerks.
The innocuous friendly bat is joined by actual monsters, and I'm not prejudging here. The names given by the manual include a blue ghost, kind of an alien-looking head, a green smiler, possibly an intentional misspelling of Slimer, the ugly little spud from 1984 movie Ghostbusters.
He's an ugly little spud, isn't he?
I think he can hear you, Ray.
Who was given the name Slimer in the real Ghostbusters cartoon. What else? A red devil, yellow poltergeist, blue octopussy, a ball with 10 protruding tentacles. Wouldn't that make it a decapussy? A mummy head, and dominating the center with arms outstretched, the Grim Reaper. In the top right, there's a cluster of 3 bumpers with 3 rollover targets above them, spelling out the word key, K-E-Y. Above this area, at the very top center of the table, is the tower, a 360-degree spinning ramp with a sinkhole at the end. Usually, the entrance to the tower is blocked by a door. Top left is a ramp called the Vault Ramp, which leads to a raised path. 3 rollover targets spelling the acronym RIP, rest in peace, are near the entrance, and this empties out to one of 2 rails, one leading to the vault in the bottom left corner, the other depositing the ball in the left inner lane. A ramp on the right side is where you collect screens, good for multiples of 100,000 points after draining, plus other goodies as well. All around the center of the table are stand-up targets. The extreme left and right spell stone, S-T-O on the left, N-E on the right. Between them, the letters B-O-N and E for bone. Halfway up the right edge of the table, you'll find the well, another sinkhole for various goodies. Oh, and there are left and right orbits around the perimeter. Those factor in later. Starting up the game drops a ball into the launch lane. Let's pull the plunger back to learn about the rules of this table, and there are many. First up, when you launch, one of the letters in the key rollovers will be flashing. Getting the ball through the flashing target earns you a skill shot, and increasing millions of points. Afterward, your flippers will cycle which letters are lit, and it's possible for the bumpers to kick the ball back up through them, letting you spell out the complete word, which, the first time you complete it, opens up the tower for 1 million points. The second completed key sequence lights the tower for 5 million points. The third lights double bonus. The fourth lights the hold bonus. After this, completed key sequences open the tower for 5 million points each time. All those monsters at the center of the table, well, all the monsters plus the perfectly innocent bat who probably just wants to eat mosquitoes all night, thank you very much. All of these are lit in turn by completing the stone and bone sequences, lighting all those letters. That bat is good for many things in real life, but also 5 million points here. The blue ghost enables Tower Hunt, the red devil is 10 million points, the yellow poltergeist enables Ghost Hunter, the blue decapussy enables Multi-Demon, the mummy head is 15 million, and the Grim Reaper enables Grim Reaper. what are all these various modes? In Tower Hunt, you have 30 seconds to shoot the ball into the tower as many times as you can, and you're awarded an increasing number of points each time. The manual says 5, 10, and 20 million points in turn. Ghost Hunter makes all the targets and bumpers worth 1 million points for 30 seconds. This also lights Jackpot in the tower, and if you collect the jackpot, lights the 50 million Super Jackpot for 10 seconds. Multi-Demon enables a ball lock in the vault and the well. With no locked balls, that's good for 5 million points. With one locked ball, 10 million, and 2 locked balls gives you 20 million points. While the ball is locked either in the vault or the well, that sinkhole is unavailable. And finally, Grim Reaper.
Grim Reaper!
All the ramps and sinkholes and loops are good for 5 million points each for 50 seconds. Like in Ghost Hunter mode, the jackpot and subsequent super jackpot lights are lit. On the Screams ramp, after collecting 10 Screams, this lights extra ball in the tower, and every 10 after that lights 5 million points at the tower. The well on the right side lights the well treasure, and can activate a bonus multiplier if that light is lit. Bonus multipliers are lit if you hit the vault ramp and get the ball down the left in lane. That also lights the 2x Scream light for a few seconds, so you get double Screams. The left ramp, or the left orbit if you hit that repeatedly, will get you 1 million points each time. Spelling RIP, completing that sequence, which, like the key letters, can be cycled with the flippers. This will enable the kickback in the left ball trap, so instead of draining down the left out lane, you get the ball back. Otherwise, it's down the drain. Pinball Fantasies makes full use of the Atari Jaguar controller, except for the 9 button. Sorry, 9 button, you're left out here. For the default controls in-game, the D-pad in any direction activates the left flipper, and the B button activates the right flipper. The C button will pull back the spring. The longer you hold it down, the farther back it'll pull, and release the button to shoot. The A button will nudge the table, but too much nudging and it'll tilt, so use it sparingly. The pause button will pause the game. The dot matrix display will say game paused, but you can push the 1 and 3 buttons together to turn that off, and you'll see what was on the scoreboard before pausing. So many games use this key sequence to turn off that paused graphic. I wonder if it's one of the things that Atari Quality Control asked for before approving the game. Anyway, while the game is paused, the music still plays, and you can scroll up or down the table using the D-pad. A, B, or C will set the master volume level, affecting both sound effects and music, which the D-pad left or right can adjust from 0 to 100%. Pressing A, B, or C again will lock that in, and pressing the option button while paused gives you the ability to change any of the game options on the fly, which is nice. Well, that would be any of the game options except for the number of balls, 3 or 5, because that would be weird to change in-game. So with these in-pause game options, the D-pad up and down will cycle between difficulty, scrolling, music on or off, sound effects on or off, global volume, and joypad config. I'll go over what all this means shortly. Volume here is adjusted by pushing the D-pad left or right, but all the other options are toggled with the A, B, or C buttons. Pressing 0 while paused will mute or unmute sounds, which is useful if you wanted to pause the game to answer the phone or something. Option again will go back to the regular paused screen, and pause again will resume play. Pressing the option button outside of the paused menu will give you a separate little menu in the dot matrix display with options to return to the main menu, enter the in-game options menu, or return to the game in progress by pushing A, B, or C respectively. The manual says to wait until a ball is in the chute before you can hit option, but really you can do this at any time on a table. During the table preview, to start a game, push the number of desired players, 1 through 8, on the keypad. The 0 button is mute, mutes all the sounds and music in the game, and the star and hash buttons together at any time will reset the game to the title screen. This game only uses one Jaguar controller. If you have multiple players, you pass the controller around, and hope the person in turn before you wasn't too sweaty. The title sequence starts with a few vanity screens. If you're just turning the game on for the first time, you'll see a small rectangular licensed by Atari Corp image in the black screen, but this is not shown when you perform a soft reset with the star and hash buttons. The first vanity screen is for 21st Century Entertainment, the publisher. The second is for C West, the distributor, and the third is for Spidersoft, who ported the game. Each of these is on a white background, but between the screens they fade to black using a pattern dissolve effect. Fading out and fading in takes about a second each, and the image is displayed intact for 2 seconds. You can skip these 2 screens by pushing or holding down a button. Pretty much any button will do, but let's use the 9 button for this, since 9 was feeling left out. After cycling through the vanity screens, you have the Pinball Fantasies logo, basically a zoomed-in recreation of a section of the Partyland table with half the clown face and some rockets and a couple letters and the word mad. This fades in with the same dissolve effect, but lasts for 3 seconds instead of 2, and you can only skip 2 of those seconds by hitting a button. Now that that's all done, let's get to the main menu, as it were. There's a gray rectangle along the left side of the screen, which shows the Spidersoft logo at the top, Pinball Fantasies logo before that, and the 21st Century Entertainment logo at the bottom. The Pinball Fantasies logo is vertical, with black capital letters reading Pinball, and a white script reading Fantasies. Every 8 seconds, the Pinball Fantasies logo is replaced by a table listing with the number and name for all the tables. The right side of the screen, the remainder of the screen, shows a logo for each table, 2 at a time. After showing the first 2, we see the high scores for those, and then the same after the second 2 tables, and then it's back to the first 2 again. These cycle every 6 seconds or so, and every other time through the loop, the high scores are replaced by either the credits or further instructions on how to select a table, because what are you waiting for? In the background, while all this is happening, you have a cool plasma effect going on with splotches of cycling colors. It looks pretty fancy, and I believe is only found on the Jaguar port of this game, but I can't say that conclusively. The buttons 1 through 4 on the keypad will start the table. 1 is Partyland, 2 is Speed Devils, 3 is $1 Billion Game Show, sometimes just called $1 Billion, and 4 is Stones and Bones. The D-pad and any other button will cycle between the different screens without waiting 6 seconds between each one, and the option button enters a separate options menu. Inside this options menu, you still have the same color cycling plasma background and light gray rectangle on the left, but the main part of the screen is presented in light blue text with shadowing underneath the letters to make them easier to read. There are 7 options here, not including exit, and these show the name and value for each setting. You move an arrow up or down the D-pad to select the option you want, and then toggle the values with the B button. You can also push the option button again over each of these settings, and the game will tell you what the settings mean, using a big blue-gray marble-looking slab behind black text. It's very considerate, saves you from looking at the manual or online if you don't know what any of the options mean. Along the left side of the screen, in that vertical gray rectangle with the Spidersoft logo up top and 21st Century logo at the bottom, there's text telling you basically what I just did. Press the option button for help, toggle option with the B button. So the options here are, from top to bottom, the number of balls, 3 is the default, but it can also be 5. Difficulty is hard by default, but can also be set to easy. The help text says that this causes the ball to slow down on easy. On the Super Nintendo port, they describe this setting as altering the tilt of the pinball machine. Less of an angle means slower ball movement, if you like to think of it that way. But here on the Jaguar, it just says easy or hard. The ball does move plenty fast on hard mode, super fast at times, and while it can exhibit speedy movement in easy mode sometimes depending on various factors, my friend Cert described it as behaving like the ball was moving through water. It's a lot easier to get into the game initially on easy mode though. These are all on an NTSC console, and why that's significant I'll get into later. Scrolling is next. Soft is the default, but setting it to hard causes the screen to follow the ball with severe accuracy rather than sort of catching up to the ball on the soft setting. The screen can really move with this set to hard, and it can be kind of disorienting, but some people prefer to know exactly where the ball is at all times. Music and sound effects are next. These can be independently toggled on or off, and below these you have the overall volume, which starts at 100, but can be reduced to 0% in 5% increments. Below volume is the joypad setup, and this changes what the A, B, and C buttons do. Setup 1 is the default, but 2 and 3 are also available, and the game will show you, with a picture of the top part of a Jaguar controller, which buttons do what. And finally, exit will save your options to the cartridge and return to the main menu. Holding the star, option, and hash buttons from the options menu will reset the cartridge memory to default, including settings and high scores. You'll see cartridge memory cleared in yellow text on a black background, and the game will also reset at that time. The in-game screen is split with the dot matrix display up top and the table display below that. According to my measurements, it's about 85% table, 15% display. Before you start a table by pushing the button for the number of players 1 through 8, the table will scroll up and down so that you can see the whole thing. It takes about 6.5 seconds each way on an NTSC TV. The lights on each table will cycle. This is attract mode after all, and the dot matrix display will show the table name, the name of the game, Pinball Fantasies, the text, the real simulator, and the high scores for the table, and finally what the buttons do, number of players 1 through 8, and so forth. The table pans slightly to the right when there's a ball in the chute, which crops off the left edge of the table until you start playing, at which point the view moves back the other way. Now, if you're playing this game on a modern LCD TV, you may notice that during gameplay, the entire chute is totally visible, so there shouldn't be any reason for the screen to shift back and forth like this, right? But on older TVs, like my CRT, this movement is totally necessary since the TV can't display absolutely every pixel the Jaguar is pushing out. Jeff Minter recently tweeted that Atari had a large number of crummy TVs that they used for testing, to make sure that the game displayed properly on all of them with no important parts cut off the edges. So if you're looking at your HD TV and wondering why the screen needed to shift at all, that's why. After a ball drains, your bonus is tallied. You start with the bonus you've earned. Next, any bonus multiplier, if you have one, is applied. And then the number of cyclones or miles or skills or screams times 100,000. The total bonus is then displayed and added to your score. These sounds can differ between the tables. I just picked one as an example. Your player number is then shown at the left with your score on the right for about a second, and then it shows the next player number and his or her score. After launching the ball, it shows your player number and current ball number on the left, score on the right. As you play, various animations or messages will appear in the dot matrix display, and if nothing happens for a while, it'll scroll the current player number and ball number in full-size letters. Usually that information on the left is in half-height letters. If you get a high score on the table, each table has its own high score music, and you can choose 3 characters, A through Z, plus numbers and some symbols for your initials. Left and right moves between the available characters, and then the B button selects it. There are a set of default high scores for each table using the initials DDP, RL, ANY, and C-J. These initials have different positions on each table, and the initial scores for tables 1 and 3 are 5 million, 10 million, 25 million, and 50 million. For tables 2 and 4, it's 10, 25, 50, and 100 million for the defaults, so you can see which ones are generally the higher scoring tables. graphics, as I said, are bright and colorful, more so on the Jaguar than the other ports. Gradients are smooth and the colors are rich. The dot matrix display has a lot of fun animation, and on my LCD TV it has a rainbow sort of effect. They're not all the same color, but have vertical bands of color. On the CRT, this isn't the case. The display is all white or an off-white color. I found that interesting. Your perspective in the game is looking directly down at the table, not at an angle as if you were playing a real pinball machine. And the dot matrix display is always positioned at the top of the screen. The ball is shiny, but doesn't reflect any surfaces. The music is everywhere in this game. Different tunes for special modes. It's all 4-channel ProTracker style module files, which you can actually find online over at the Fading Twilight archive, which I've linked in the show notes. I'm pretty sure those are off of the original Amiga, those files, and not ripped off of a Jaguar cartridge ROM. Olaf Gustafsson, as I said, did the music here, and it's fantastic. There's a lot of real demo scene sort of stuff, which I love. The sound effects are good, they're fine, but they all seem to come out of the left channel on a stereo TV. Music comes out of both channels, different instruments on each side, as you can hear in this episode if you're playing it through headphones or stereo speakers. Now, a very interesting thing about both the graphics and music, and the gameplay as it turns out, is how differently this game runs on a PAL region Jaguar. I don't typically do NTSC versus PAL comparisons on this podcast because I don't have a PAL region Jaguar, so I can't look at differences between the two hands-on. But I was talking with Lewis, who was helping out with some screenshots of the Amiga version, and what he was seeing on his Amiga was far different from what I was getting on my Jaguar, so that got me thinking about the different display standards. Very briefly, these two acronyms, NTSC and PAL, describe different color encoding systems. The National Television Systems Committee, NTSC standard, is used in North America and Japan, some South American countries too. PAL, or Phase Alternation by Line, is used in most of Europe, Australia, New Zealand, some South America, Africa, Asia. There are multiple differences between these two formats, but the ones I'm going to focus on are the vertical frequency and the horizontal lines. PAL can display more lines but at a slower refresh rate, and NTSC displays fewer lines but at a faster rate. The numbers for NTSC are 520 lines at 60 Hz. Hertz is a measurement of frequency cycles per second, named after German physicist Heinrich Hertz, I believe. PAL, on the other hand, can do 625 lines of resolution, but at 50 Hz. The difference is very noticeable in Pinball Fantasies. On a PAL region Jaguar, you see much more of the table at once. Take the Partyland table as an example. From the very bottom of the Partyland table on an NTSC Jaguar, the visible height extends up to the middle of the letter A in the vertical word crazy. On a PAL Jaguar, you can not only see the entire letter A, but the entire letter R above it and the entire letter C above that, up to the top of the circle around the letter. That's a significant difference. I found a video on YouTube, a German review of Pinball Fantasies on the Jaguar running on actual hardware, and this is what I used for comparison. Now, what this video also shows is that the ball moves much slower than what I'm accustomed to on my NTSC Jaguar. The comments on that video are actually very helpful in describing the differences between the two encoding standards. One commenter, which I ran through Google Translate because I don't speak German, said that Pinball Fantasies is about as fast on his 60 Hz device as the Amiga version, and that this was true for all Jaguar games. They're too slow on the 50 Hz console and much less fun. If you look at the Wikipedia page for Pinball Fantasies under the list of available versions, it says the Jaguar version has extra colors but slower ball movement. This must be a reference to the PAL version, backed up by the British spelling of the word colors. Anybody want to edit that? It should say slower ball movement on PAL region consoles. If Wikipedia will accept it, you can cite my podcast as a reference. Another commenter on that video said that the speed of the music was affected as well. On the PAL Jaguar, the music matched that of the Amiga version, but the game speed was too slow. On the 60 Hz NTSC Jaguar, the game speed is right, but the music speed is too fast. Too fast. I hadn't thought about that before, that the Pinball Fantasies music, with which I was so familiar over the years, didn't have the right tempo. I had played the mod files independently, but didn't really notice any difference until I started looking for it. I generated a waveform out of one of the mod files on Fading Twilight, and then compared that to what I captured off of my NTSC Jaguar. I would expect a roughly 2% difference in tempo, considering the difference between 50 to 60 Hz is 2%, and yeah, the Jaguar version plays about 2% faster. Here, listen to this. I've got a sample of the beginning of the title theme. I'll play the export from the mod file first on the left channel, and then the capture from the Jaguar version in the right channel. Can you tell the difference? The PlayStation version, for what it's worth, matches the mod file export pretty much exactly, so the NTSC Jaguar version definitely plays faster. I didn't notice it until now, and it's hard to unhear once you've heard it.
Edit.
A couple more notes about the music and sound effects in this game. As you may have noticed while I was describing the tables, the background music will stop for many of the sound effects. Things like bumpers and slingshots and rollover targets and stuff, they don't interrupt the music, but activating certain things accompanied by an animation in the dot matrix display, the music will stop, play the associated sound effect, and then pick back up. It doesn't necessarily resume from where it left off. In fact, it might never resume. It'll pick up from certain continue points in the background music track. I also noticed after recording that if you turn off the sound effects, the music will not stop for animations, so it's clearly stopping to emphasize the sound effects for whatever feats you just accomplished. I should also note that the special game modes, your Mega Laugh or Happy Hour, Turbo Mode, Grim Reaper, and the like, I wasn't able to get those, at least not able to get them while I happened to be recording. So what I did was I took the mod files, I matched tempo with the NTSC playback rate, and inserted those. So if they sounded slightly different to you, or if you noticed preceding sound effects were missing from what you remember, that's why. I would have loved to extract all the music and sound effects from the Jaguar version of the game, but I'm just not that good, and still wanted to give you an indication of what it would sound like. High score music too. The high score themes are tempo matched mod file exports. I've inserted one of them already from Partyland and might insert more later. Like, how about now? Now's a good time. Let's get back to the show with a high score theme from Speed Devils. There is a cheat code listed on Atari Age for the Jaguar version of the game. After game over, press 7 or 9 to continue where you left off. This totally doesn't work for me. I can spam these buttons, hold them separately or together, and nothing happens during game over. After game over, of course, the 7 button will start a 7-player game, which isn't usually what I want. I don't see any bugs listed for this game, though I noticed sometimes sounds don't play when they're supposed to, like slingshots and bumpers sometimes don't make a sound. In the game facts entry for the DOS version, the author points to a programming oversight where on tables with a hold bonus, you can get it to hold the special modes where ramps and targets and things are worth extra points, and amplify that with the multipliers, and then hold again on the next ball. An example the author gives on the Stones and Bones table, holding the bonus in Grim Reaper mode, where loops, ramps, and sinkholes are worth 5 million each. If you get a 10x multiplier on the next ball and then hold the bonus again, and on the third ball get to 6x multiplier, those 5 million point loops could be worth 705 million each, effectively making high scores meaningless since you can rack up over 2 billion points. Whether this only applies to the DOS version, I don't know because I lack the skills to pull this off. This is a third-party game, but follows the Jaguar packaging design language pretty well, except for the screenshots. The screenshots aren't framed like a TV set, but instead show the full play field for each table in the game, with the Partyland table on the front of the box and all 4 on the back. The front is dominated by a small section of the artwork from the Partyland table. This is a hand-drawn recreation of that part of the table rather than a picture of the in-game graphics. And you can see the top of the arcade in the top right corner down to the base of the top flipper in the bottom left corner. About half the clown's face is visible behind the ESRB logo and maybe the Jaguar hologram sticker used on third-party releases. The name of the game is printed diagonally across the artwork. The word pinball is all lowercase, bright red letters with a yellow frame and white shadow, if shadow is the right term here. The word fantasies is below that, also at an angle, but all caps, and in a sans serif font, white with a black border. On other ports of the game, like the Amiga and CD32 and DOS, the word fantasies is written in a strange double-stroke scripty font, which is much harder to read. I think the title on the Jaguar box art is the most legible of the bunch. The Partyland screenshot, as I said, is on the front, surrounded by a thick yellow border, which doesn't exactly fit the image. There's a small gap at the top between the table and the border. Gotta look closely. On the back, there's no border around the 4 tables pictured. I should note that none of the screenshots have the dot matrix displays for the tables, just the tables themselves. The text on the back is available in 3 languages, and the English version reads, "Are you up to the challenge? Turn your Jaguar into the ultimate amusement arcade with Pinball Fantasies, the greatest pinball simulator ever. This classic game offers 4 scorchingly addictive tables with the most realistic ball movements you'll ever see in a video game. If you're looking for instant playability, speed, and excitement, Pinball Fantasies is the game for you. But be warned, 1 game and you're hooked." The German translation is actually fairly different. To start, it says, 21st Century Entertainment presents for your Jaguar Pinball Fantasies. It includes the names of the tables in the description and mentions sophisticated sound effects. The French translation is pretty close to the English one. The cartridge label features a portion of the box art background. You see the arcade from the Partyland table. The name of the game has the same treatment as the box art, but is horizontal, not at an angle. 21st Century Entertainment logo is off to the right side of the label. Like other third-party releases, the cartridge lacks the embossed Atari logo on the back, but the plastic feels the same otherwise, same thickness and pebbling and curved handle design. The manual is 21 pages if you include the covers and exclude the extra translations. And, well, I need to be honest here. I've been using Atari Age for most of the manual references in past episodes of this podcast because it was easier than going into the closet and finding that box with all my Jaguar manuals in it. I look up the box art on Atari Age because I hardly kept any of my boxes, and the manual's right there too on the webpage, so that's what I've been using. I did, however, actually dig out my Pinball Fantasies manual, and it's a whole lot thicker than 21 pages because it includes the German and French translations as well. The manual covers the controls, gameplay options, general information, and includes full-page pictures of each table, also listing out the rules. Like other Jaguar manuals, these are all monochrome, so that makes the tables a little harder to analyze, but it's not too bad, I guess. Pinball Fantasies is not included in the official Jaguar Gamer's Guide, but C West did produce a magazine advertisement for the game. The ad contains the logo for the game up top, images of all 4 tables across the center. Now, these are the exact same full-height table images used on the box art and in the manual, but have a dot matrix display added to the top. It doesn't look right, though. I don't know if these dot matrix displays are from a mock-up or from an earlier version of the game, but the fonts are all wrong. The ad has a metal lane running from the bottom left, curving up toward the top right, and has several bullet points written out on 6 black balls spread throughout the lane. Up to 8 players, unlimited hours of gameplay, top 4 scores for each table are saved, multiple table settings, authentic soundtrack, 4 different and challenging tables. I sounded kind of bored when I read those off, but all of them have exclamation points, so perhaps I should have injected more enthusiasm. The copy for this ad is almost word for word the same as the English translation on the box, except for one notable thing, and that's where instead of saying scorchingly addictive tables, it says mind-numbing tables. The term mind-numbing usually has a highly negative connotation to it, doesn't it? Bishop, if I were to invite you to listen to my mind-numbing podcast, what would you do?
I would avoid your stupid podcast.
Yeah, I know, right?
But I can't.
No, you can't, can you? But anyway, other than the odd adjective choice, it's a pretty good ad. You can find it in the show notes. There are not many magazine reviews for Pinball Fantasies. There was a preview for the game in the March 1995 issue of Electronic Gaming Monthly, a 2-page preview that looks okay, covers all the tables, says Partyland is the toughest, Speed Devil is the easiest to get a multiplier bonus, $1 Billion Game Show doesn't have any superlatives, and Stones and Bones is the best table. For actual reviews, I have 3. The first is from issue 70 of GamePro magazine, May 1995. Reviewer Captain Squidio calls Pinball Fantasies on the Jaguar surprisingly mundane. There's not much action, just standard pinball on 4 small tables, no power-ups, hidden warp areas, no characters. Control is mindless, you're just hitting flippers, and Sonic Spinball on the Game Gear offered more gameplay. Pinball Fantasies does have decent graphics, the tables are sharp and colorful, and the sounds create a fine atmosphere, but where are the voices and memorable music? The game isn't any different from the old pinball machines left in the dust years ago by arcade video games, he says. He closes the review by saying that you'd have to be living in a fantasy world to think Pinball Fantasies provides real video game fun. Clever wordplay there, huh?
Sarcasm detected.
I thought I turned off Bishop's sarcasm detector. Anyway, on a scale of 1 to 10, he rates graphics 3.0, sound 3.5, control 2.0, and fun factor 1.0. There are a few pro tips here. Using your flipper, catch the ball, cradle it, then carefully aim it for maximum points. You can hit balls with the most force if you strike them with the tip of your flippers. Use tilt, button A, sparingly. A few taps can shake the table to your advantage. Captain Squidio also reviewed the Game Boy version of Pinball Fantasies in the same issue, with lower scores for graphics and sound, though not as much lower as you might think, and the same scores for control and fun factor. If you are looking for a second opinion, let's take a look at X-Gen magazine, a British publication generously provided by The Lost Dragon. The reviewer calls this a good conversion with, quote, the wicked music still making play pretty exciting, end quote, and the graphics made more colorful on the Jaguar. The tables are packed with plenty of bonus areas and special shots, as well as extremely realistic ball movement and smooth screen scrolling. He does admit that unless you're a pinball fan, you may find the lack of innovation a little bland. Like GamePro, the reviews are broken down on a scale of 1 to 5. Visuals gets a 3, sound effects a 3, creativity 2, gameplay 4, and desirability 2. Overall score 84%. Across the channel, there's a review from the French magazine Consoles Plus, where the reviewer Mark gives the game 80% overall, calling it a good pinball simulation. Over on Atari Age, there are 5 external reviews listed, ranging from 40% from Atari Gaming Headquarters to 82% from the Video Game Critic. B- actually, from the Video Game Critic, so I guess that would be somewhere between 80 and 82%. The average here on Atari Age is 65%. I'd like to point out a few items from the Atari Gaming Headquarters review, where the reviewer calls it nothing but a direct port of the Super Nintendo version with incredibly unrealistic ball movement. The sound is generally weak, he says, the music doesn't mesh well with the tables, and the Partyland table especially could have used more colors. Liberal use of colors is what he said. In a summary, he calls this a, quote, disastrous effort. Stepping back a bit in time to Atari Explorer Online, Mark Stingray Santora reviewed a pre-release version of the game in the February 1995 issue of this online magazine. He calls it a, quote, very good representation of real pinball. For the graphics, he says everything is well defined with lots of color, the in-game music fits each board, and is good, but not at the Tempest 2000 level. On a scale of 1 to 5, Mark gave graphics 3.5, sound 3.0, control 3.5, gameplay 4.0, and overall 4.0. On Atari Age, the rarity for Pinball Fantasies is listed as 3 out of 10, and for current prices, I see the game listed used with a poor label for $15.99 at the GOAT store, and none of the other Atari vendors on my list. So we'll take a look at eBay, and there haven't been a lot of recent sales there either. I see one new in box that sold for $45, and a loose cart for $6.50 plus shipping. For current listings, there's one loose cart for $40, a few complete with box and manual in the UK for around $50 plus shipping, and a few in France and the Netherlands for the equivalent of $75 US. I'm kind of surprised. With a rarity of 3, I would have expected to see more of these floating around. Checking out the Atari Age high score database, I see high scores for 2 of the tables. 102,737,980 points on Partyland, set by Save 2600 in 2010, and 371,285,760 points on Stones and Bones, set by Austin in 2012. Wow, that includes a super jackpot of 50 million, so really impressive there, Austin. Both of you, I can't touch those scores. In addition to the platforms I listed earlier, which saw a Pinball Fantasies release, the tables were also included in compilations like Pinball Mania, Pinball Fantasies Deluxe, and Pinball Challenge Deluxe. I haven't played any of these, I'm only really familiar with the Jaguar and Cowboy Rodeo's PlayStation versions, though I have tried this out on the Super Nintendo. It's interesting how different the menu systems were. The game selection menus, the Jaguar version is very similar to the Amiga, except it has that color cycling plasma background. Though that's the original Amiga. The AGA version apparently only has a text-based menu, and that may be because with each table on a separate disc, there was no room left over for a fancy menu. The DOS port looks quite a bit like the Amiga. It's got the mod music, at least the time-limited demo I downloaded did. The dot matrix display is at the bottom of the screen rather than the top, and while the tables aren't as colorful as the Jaguar version, there are a few little details added here and there, like a ticket taker or something at the bottom of the Partyland playfield. The Pinball Fantasies Deluxe package on the PlayStation, I don't believe this one was released in the States. This one also puts the dot matrix display at the bottom, but features a long and unnecessary opening animation, as so many games did around that time, and it sometimes includes annoying extra voices.
Let's start. Get some cash!
The Cowboy Rodeo ports feature a different menu system where you flip through 3.5-inch floppy disks. Each one is a different table, which is kind of neat. My son discovered that you can flip the floppy disk over, and on the back you can see an anagram for Amiga. This game can be played either horizontally or vertically. You get a whole lot less scrolling, obviously, with the device held in a vertical portrait orientation. The dot matrix display can be either at the top or the bottom, depending on the version. On the PlayStations, this works on the PSP, the PS Vita, the PlayStation TV, and the PlayStation 3. Some of the table graphics aren't as vibrant as on the Jaguar, and speed-wise, it feels like the ball movement in these PlayStation versions is definitely slower than the hard setting on the Jaguar, and maybe a little faster than the easy setting. The controls are weird, not nearly as straightforward as on the Jaguar. For example, pushing left on the D-pad controls the left flipper, but right on the D-pad exits the game, and down on the D-pad toggles music, stuff like that. On the Super Nintendo, the menu system again is entirely different. A row of icons along the top for the different tables, plus one more for options. And when selected, you see an animated picture with the name of the table. Like, for example, on Partylands, there's a clown waving at you. On Speed Devils, you see cars racing around a track. The in-game graphics are redrawn and simpler than the Jaguar and Amiga and modern ports, but the layout is about the same, and the music is in stereo and sounds very similar to the original mod music, but it feels more like a recreation of the original tunes, kind of like how the Atari Flashback 1 was a recreation of the original Atari games, if that makes any sense. Speed-wise, it felt to me like ball movement on the Super Nintendo was a little bit slower than the Jaguar on the comparable skill levels. Also talking about the Super Nintendo version, the screen will pan horizontally to follow the ball, not just up and down. It can get a little dizzying when you're bouncing between slingshots. And I also noticed some odd ball physics. I often had the ball slide along the slingshots, racking up points but not launching the ball like it should. And when using the flipper to catch the ball to hold it in place, the ball kept skittering around, which it really shouldn't in real life. Actually, I've got the Super Nintendo ball jitter in my notes, but I can't single out that one because I noticed in other versions too, the PSP, an Amiga demo, a DOS demo, the Jaguar may be the only one or one of the very few without the physics-defying ball movement when it's supposed to be still. Anyway, back to the SNES. To say that the Jaguar got a port of the Super Nintendo version, as one reviewer claimed, is demonstrably false. It clearly descends from the Amiga and not the SNES. And finally, on the Game Boy, the menu is like a simplified version of the Super Nintendo, but the in-game graphics are entirely different. You see some similarities, but at first glance, you'd be excused for thinking this was an entirely different game. The music sounds like it's made up of remixed chiptune versions of the Amiga originals. Something I've noticed with many of these other ports, they play a separate music track when you get a matching number to continue, at the end of the game when you have the number match to continue, but this is missing on the Jaguar. There may be other little sound effects or music missing here and there, but this is the only one that I've noticed. Speaking of music, the Pinball Fantasies music, which Captain Squidio said wasn't memorable, has been remixed a few times in recent years. Well, the last 10 years or so. Here's one by the original composer. One by Thanos Action Greek. And a different take on the theme by Muffler. There were a couple more on Amiga Remix. I'll include a link to all of these in the show notes. But if you'd like to hear my thoughts about the game, including a rating, that's coming right up. You might have picked up that I wasn't a big pinball guy growing up. I remember playing an old electromechanical pinball machine at a diner in the mid-'80s. It had a skydiving theme. Sky Jump is my best guess. There's a link to that one in the show notes. And a couple years later, a friend of mine threw a birthday party at a local arcade in town. It's the first place I played arcade games like Tempest and Black Widow and APB and Zybots and Rampage. Well, not far from that Rampage cab was a pinball machine called Black Knight. I played that one a few times and rather liked it. It was fun. Back in the Doom episode, I talked about the 25 MHz 486 computer that my mom bought, an Acer desktop computer, and this computer had a couple games pre-installed on it, and one of those games was a demo copy of a game called Epic Pinball with 3 tables available. Pangea, Space Journey, and what was the other one? Oh, Toy Factory. But I mostly just played Pangea and Space Journey. I can't stress enough how much of an impact this game had on me. It was my first exposure to demo scene style music, pixel shatter style effects in the simulated dot matrix display, and video pinball in general. I had played games like Video Pinball on the 2600 and David's Midnight Magic on the XEGS, and I liked those, but Epic Pinball was on a whole other level. Oh, here, when I had the DOS computer hooked up to capture sounds for Doom, I also recorded some of the Epic Pinball music, thinking ahead. So, here's the main theme song. And the song from Space Journey, my favorite table. It's good, right? Sounds good now, but it was amazing to me back in '94. I loved it, every little bit. Not enough to mail off a check for $59 for the complete set of Epic Pinball tables, mind you, but still, this opened my eyes and ears to what pinball and video games could be. It got me into checking out the demo scene as well, groups like Future Crew and the like. The next year, 1995, Pinball Fantasies came out on the Jaguar, and I didn't hesitate to buy a copy. I sat through the tedious vanity screens at the beginning, figured out how to select a table. Despite all the on-screen instructions, it wasn't terribly obvious how to choose a table. I hit number 1, of course, being a fine place to start counting, and was immediately turned off by Partyland. The obnoxious carnival music, the clown featured at the center of the table, I didn't care for that at all. I think I bailed before even trying it out. It's trendy to hate clowns these days, but even back then, I didn't like clowns, never have. The exaggerated emotion on display, so synthetic and creepy, totally not for me. I went through the other tables in order and found a little to like. The music was good, especially the theme that plays when you go back to the menu the first time. Yeah, that one. But I didn't really get into the game in general. It was okay, but not compelling. I've mentioned in past episodes that my friends liked playing the Jaguar. It was something new and different. So when Pinball Fantasies entered the picture, they leaped on it, largely because you can have up to 8 players competing against each other in the same game. So we started playing, and playing a lot. Stones and Bones quickly became the favorite, and having 3, 4, or 5 guys trying to top each other for the high score was thrilling. It was the most requested Jaguar game when they came over to my house, or when I took the Jaguar over to theirs. My friend Sert, he really got into this game, and in fact, this game made him want to buy a Jaguar. So he did. It was literally a system seller. He still holds several of the high score slots on my cartridge, and if I could just step back a minute and think about it, how cool is it that my cartridge still has all the scores from 20 plus years ago? I know that on most Jaguar cartridges, the EEPROM still works, still has all this data stored, but it's an interesting snapshot. It captured that period of time when my friends were really into this game, all gathered around and playing the Jaguar. But it gets better. Not only did Pinball Fantasies get a lot of play from a bunch of college-age dudes, my sister played it too. I always wanted to get my sister more interested in video games. She's 3 years younger than I am, and other than Frogger and Stampede, and a little bit of Sorcerer's Apprentice, I think, on the Atari 2600, she didn't seem to have much interest. But she liked playing Pinball Fantasies, she really did. In fact, the top score on Stones and Bones on my cartridge is one that she set. 123,885,350 points, and nobody's been able to touch it since. She also has the number 4 spot on Partyland. My friend Sert borrowed this cartridge for a while after he got a Jaguar, but before he got his own copy of Pinball Fantasies, and he dominates the high score table. He holds 3rd and 4th place on Stones and Bones, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th on Billion Dollar Game Show, 3rd on Speed Devils, and 2nd on Partyland. As for me, I just have 1 score on this cartridge, 3rd place on Partyland. Yeah, once I got over the initial objection to that table, it really is solid. It's my second favorite after Stones and Bones. So, for my overall likes and dislikes, first, I like the music. Despite what Captain Squidio said in his Game Pro review, I find the music very memorable and have been known to listen to the mod files just because. I like the gameplay and the challenge. The tables offer a decent variety in objectives and implementation. Controls are really good, and the game is overall fun to play. It's a lot of fun. What I dislike, the likes were all pretty general, but the dislikes are much more specific. I don't like the Partyland preview music, though the in-game song is just fine when you're actually playing the table, so it certainly gets better, but, first impressions and all that. Besides the blinking lights, there really isn't much movement on the table. For example, in Stones and Bones, when the tower is open, the barrier still looks like it's there, and the ball just passes through it. Knock a ball into the Sky Ride on Partyland, and a door theoretically closes to keep it from bouncing out, but that door is always present. It always appears to be there. This isn't specific to the Jaguar version, I'm pretty sure, and it's barely noticeable, but I'm pointing out dislikes here, so I might as well nitpick. I don't like having to sit through or skip the vanity screens when turning on this game. It's a little much, but it does seem to be par for the course for this game. Every version I've checked out has these screens, and for the Game Boy at least, you have to watch them. You can't skip through them at all. I wish tallying up the scores after each ball, I wish that didn't take as long. It's a little too drawn out. And finally, I really wish the Jaguar version had commas in the scores, actual separators every 3 digits rather than a long stream of numbers. Comma separators are something you see in most of the other ports, not the Nintendo ones, but the others, including the Amiga original, I believe, but not the Jaguar. I did see a time-limited demo on the Amiga that did not have the commas, but videos I've seen on YouTube do. Regardless, it would have been nice on the Jag. Let's check in with the No Swear Gamer scale to see how I should rate Pinball Fantasies. The top rating is Hall of Fame for the top 5 games on the Jaguar. One step down is Solid, followed by Meh, and then Trash for the bottom 5 games on the platform. For me, I'm going to give Pinball Fantasies a Hall of Fame rating. There was a short-lived sketch comedy show around 1994 to 95, a half-hour syndicated show that ran every weeknight called The News, spelled with a Z. I loved that show, really did, and there was a recurring sketch. I think it only ran on Wednesdays, but I could be wrong on that. And in this sketch, comedian Tommy Blaze would sit in a big chair in front of a bank of TV screens and talk about some recent news, spelled with an S. And toward the end of his bit, he would go into a little rant telling you what it's all about. Pinball Fantasies is fun, it's endlessly replayable and great with the group. It pulled my sister in and led my friend to go and buy a Jaguar of his own. Pinball Fantasies may not push the boundaries of what the Jaguar can do. It may be a port of a 3-year-old computer game that also existed on a number of other platforms, so it's not exclusive, not all that special, but it's fun. It's super fun and approachable. It's a good time is had by all, and people, that is what it's all about. In the lead up to this episode, I played this game a lot with my son. He's 10 years old. I taught him everything I knew about it. It didn't take long, and he started beating me sometimes when he played back-to-back. Embarrassing maybe, but it's all good. It's a good time. I don't mind losing sometimes. I bought the Cowboy Rodeo port of this game for the PlayStation while doing research for this episode. I have 3 different PlayStation-y systems, a PSP Go, a PlayStation TV micro console, and a regular old PS3 Slim, and the game works great on all of them. It's cool that I can buy it once and play it on these very different formats, and it works nicely. The vertical orientation on the PSP Go doesn't work too well. The Go has a screen that slides up to reveal the controls. I've got it right here. That's what it sounds like. So it's not terribly usable like that. The screen gets in the way of the buttons. You can work with it. It's not great. A regular PSP or a Vita would probably work better. But regardless, playing this in a portrait orientation lets you see most of the screen at once, so you don't have to scroll as much. One other odd thing about this port I noticed is that the sound isn't in stereo. It's all mixed together, which you might not notice if you're not looking for it specifically. when I sat down, before I launched the podcast, I put all the games in a spreadsheet in the order I wanted to cover them. And I sat down and looked at the list trying to pick out my 5 Hall of Fame titles. 4 were easy right off the bat, but that 5th slot, I had to really think about that one to ask myself, which game did I really enjoy most back then or even today? And there it was, right there, Pinball Fantasies, of course. I had so much fun with this game, along with my friends and family, that it had to be a Hall of Fame pick for me. I've played them all, well, most of them, and Pinball Fantasies is one of my top 5 favorite games on the Jaguar, no question. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? I posted a picture of the magazine ad on Facebook soliciting opinions. I heard from Randal, who says, "Solid, if only for the Stones and Bones and Partyland tables. I played Speed Devils sometimes and only tried Game Show a few times, but I do like it when the announcer says Money Mania." Thank you, Randal. Those are my favorites, too, but the others have their charm. Sometimes the wide-open loop combo nature of Billion Dollar Game Show is a nice change of pace from the more target-heavy tables. I didn't see anything on the forums, so Bishop, did we get any text or audio submissions for Pinball Fantasies?
We did. 1 audio submission, plus general feedback.
Ooh, I do like audio submissions. And I know who this is from. This is from Lewis. I mentioned him a little while ago, helping me out with the Amiga comparisons, so let's roll the tape.
Hey Shinto, how's it going? It's Lewis. Yeah, Pinball Fantasies. What a great pinball game this is. So, I gotta admit, I don't have the Jaguar one. I almost won a copy on eBay a few weeks ago, but was beat out at the last minute. So, I guess I'm just going to assume that it's more or less like the Amiga one. I'm sure you'll cover it in exhaustive detail, because you always do. But yeah, it's I think in general it's one of the best pinball games of its era by far. I mean, you know, the nearest competition was Epic Pinball, and although I have a soft spot for that game, I think Pinball Fantasies just kind of creams it. You know, my favorite table's got to be the racing one. What is that? Speed Devils? Is that it? Yeah, Speed Devils. And, you know, because I love racing games, so I like the theme of that. And then I like the Partyland table a lot, but man, that music just drives me insane. I think it's so bad. But it's a great table, nonetheless. The other two are pretty good as well. So yeah, you know, assuming the Jaguar version is up to the Amiga one, it's probably really a great game. I mean, everything about it, from the fast scrolling and the most of the soundtrack's actually pretty groovy. The controls are really responsive and the physics are great. There's not a lot to dislike about it, really. Especially when you compare it to other pinball games of its era. You know, you go to like Crewball or something, and it's just such a step down. The only video pinball games I think I like from that time period as much are the Crush games, like Alien Crush, and what's the one everyone likes is Devil Crush. And then there was actually kind of a sort of follow-up by a different company on the Saturn called Fantastic Pinball, which I think is really great. It's by Technosoft, who did the port of Devil Crush for the Genesis, and they went on and kind of did their own, went off in another direction. But yeah, I'm derailing your whole show here, sorry about that. Assuming Pinball Fantasies on the Jaguar is like the Amiga one, that sounds like a must-get to me, and I'm gonna keep trying to get it myself, I guess. Unless your show comes out and says that the translation was messed up or something. Anyway, I look forward to hearing about how it compares and, how it plays. Alright, well, Shinto, thank you for all your hard work in making these cool shows, and I'm really looking forward to this one. Thanks.
Thank you, Lewis. It was great to hear from you. I do agree that Pinball Fantasies is better than Epic Pinball, as much as I love Epic Pinball. And I did, while working on this podcast, I went over to Good Old Games, GOG.com, and bought a copy of Epic Pinball. It was on sale, and I figured I'd probably waited long enough to finally get the full version of the game. But even the normal asking price is way, way less than the $59 it cost back in '94. So I played that, and it's great fun, but the tables in Pinball Fantasies seem bigger, more elaborate, and while I don't think that you can go wrong with either, I do think that Pinball Fantasies is the better of the two. Oh, that reminds me, the slingshots in Pinball Fantasies, they have no animation. It's just like a solid surface that the ball knocks against, but on some of the epic pinball tables, you actually see the rubber band or whatever it is knock the ball out of the slingshot. It would have been nice to see that in Pinball Fantasies as well, I think. You mentioned some of the Crush games. I've played Alien Crush a fair bit, and I'll talk more about that on the Turbotastic podcast when Bryce covers that game. But quick summary, it's neat, but not, in my opinion, as playable or enjoyable as Pinball Fantasies. If you haven't heard of Turbotastic, it's a pretty new podcast covering the TurboGrafx 16 in a game-by-game format. It's really done well, informative and well-produced. There are 2 episodes now as I record this, maybe 3 by the time this episode is edited and published. And I've got a regular spot on that show, so you'll be able to hear me there too, in case you just can't get enough.
Oh dear. Time for an ego check.
I didn't ask you, Bishop. Whether or not you'd like this game on the Jaguar, Lewis, and if it's worth the money, I can't say. You'd have a smaller viewable area than the Amiga, as you've mentioned, but the controls are great. You don't have to swap floppy disks, and it's probably easier to hook up to a bigger screen than the Amiga is. I think you mentioned in your YouTube video, link in the show notes, that the screen is cut off on NTSC TVs, cut off at the bottom. So, yeah, weigh the pros and cons that I've mentioned in this episode and see if you want to get the Jaguar version. I think the $16 copy on the Goat Store is a really good price if you don't need a perfect label or manual or anything. And, of course, if it's still there when you hear this. Let's see, what else? I think that was about it. So, thanks again for your audio submission and your help with the research for this game. Your YouTube video, where you directly compare the Amiga 500 and AGA versions, that was helpful. The Jaguar is more like the AGA version in terms of graphical flair, but not exactly the same. Oh, hey, Bishop. You said there was general feedback also. Could you send that over to my screen, please?
Ready.
This one is from... Oh, this is from Sean, sometimes Janitor Sean. I think Phil the No Swear Gamer started that nickname. Sean is co-host of the Pie Factory podcast, a great show about arcade games. If you like banter between hosts, he and Jim have great synergy going, and it's obvious that they've been friends for a long time, so it's a very entertaining show. And Sean also runs the Atari 7800 Homebrew podcast, one of my favorite podcasts these days, where he covers all the homebrew games on the 7800, of which there are a lot. I can't afford any of them, but I love hearing about them. So Sean wrote in, and he said, "Hey there, Shinto. First of all, thanks for the name dropping on the latest episode. You are very welcome, Sean. You plugged my show on one of your episodes, so thank you for that as well. Second, wanted to offer a bit of clarification and background about the Amiga. I was a rabid, stubborn Amiga user from 1993 when I got an Amiga 600 through 2006 when I sold off my Micro Amiga 1C, a next-generation model that runs on a PowerPC, so I can offer you a bit of info. There's not really any game or other app that's made specifically for any particular model of Amiga, so there's technically no such thing as an Amiga 500 game or an Amiga 2000 game. Just as long as the Amiga in question meets the requirements, it should work. There are exceptions, of course. Due to some crazy system quirks, it is possible to have literally too powerful an Amiga, requiring you to run some software to dumb it down before you can run a particular program or the one-off game. The only specific thing I can think of is if a game or other program requires AGA graphics. Only the Amiga 1200 and 4000 have the AGA chipset. Well, and the CD32. To put it in Atari terms, the CD32 is to the Amiga 1200 what the Atari 5200 is to the Atari 800. In other words, the CD32 is basically an Amiga 1200 without a keyboard, but with a CD-ROM drive. I believe you can upconvert the CD32 to a full-fledged computer, but I've never had a CD32, so I don't know. But I do know that it is possible to play CD32 games on the Amiga 1200 or Amiga 4000, as I have done that before. Also, I do believe you mentioned that Brutal Sports Football was in stereo on the Amiga. Yep, I've never played it, but indeed it would be stereo. It's not that it was mixed for stereo, it's more like it's forced to be stereo. On classic Amigas, that is 500 through 4000, the built-in sound is 4 voices, with 2 voices in each stereo channel. So it's literally impossible to get mono sound unless you duplicate and ergo sacrifice a voice or 2. I don't remember hearing you mention it, but I have a strong suspicion that Brutal Sports Football was inspired by the arcade game Pigskin 621 AD, a cartoonish rugby game from the same guys who did Arch Rivals. And in fact, I'd be dead surprised if Atari didn't rip off Arch Rivals for basketball. The similarities seem to be too similar, to be coincidence. Thanks so much for doing the podcast. I don't have a Jaguar, never played one, have no idea what a Jaguar is like, but I love the content. For a long time, I'd hear your feedback on Fergs and Phil's podcasts and wonder, why does this guy not have a podcast? Well, here it is. Kudos. Thank you, Sean. It always surprises me when I hear from listeners who have never played a Jaguar, and I'm glad you like the show despite having no personal connection to the system. I didn't think I would get any non-Jaguar owners to listen when I started this podcast. Your Amiga perspective is great. As I've said before, I've never used an Amiga computer, so there's a whole lot that I don't know about it. When I talk about the different versions, like Amiga 500 versus 1200, I'm referring to the lack or presence of the AGA chipset. Maybe I don't clarify that, and maybe I didn't in this episode either, but yeah, that's what I mean. The CD32, I almost bought one of those a few years back. There was someone selling them on eBay. It was like a warehouse in the South Pacific, if I remember right. Lots of NTSC consoles, but I couldn't quite justify the price and wasn't sure about getting the games. But I did know that you could add on to the CD32 to basically make it like a full-fledged computer, and that option had some appeal to me, and the CD32 controller was distinctive and I think pretty cool looking, but in the end I passed on the CD32. That's really interesting about the stereo sound by design, that you have to sacrifice voices in order to get mono output. I really didn't know about that. For Brutal Sports Football, I didn't mention Pigskin 621 AD. I don't think I came across it in my research. I saw several mentions to Speedball 2, but didn't see Pigskin. Arch Rivals, though, I know that one well. I played it quite a bit in the arcade with my brother back before they got a rim rockin' basketball cab, and we switched to that one. It is a whole lot like basketball, and I wouldn't be a bit surprised if basketball were influenced by Arch Rivals. Thank you for your feedback, Sean, and I think that's going to do it for Pinball Fantasies. Thank you all for joining me, and in the next episode we are covering Troy Aikman NFL Football, just in time for the Super Bowl. Hopefully I can get the episode done before the Super Bowl. Pro Bowl, maybe? This is followed in subsequent episodes by Hover Strike, Cannon Fodder, and Flip Out. So if you have any feedback for these games, anything that I've covered already, or on the show in general, please send that in, text or audio, to the email address jaguar@gamebygamepodcast.com. All show information, links, and episode status and stuff can be found on the web at jaguar.gamebygamepodcast.com. I've got some story time after the music. This is optional content, but I talk about things tangentially related to topics I've mentioned on the podcast, but not specifically about Pinball Fantasies. Whether or not you stick around for that, please remember that there is a lot of good to be found out there in this world of ours, even with widely ridiculed video game consoles. So do try to keep an open mind and a joyful heart. Thank you for listening.
And now, story time with Shinto.
Speaking of Tommy Blaze, I was in college and happened to notice a poster for a comedian coming in to give a stand-up routine at the University Center, or Student Center, or whatever it was called. I never really ventured there. No computers. But they had Tommy Blaze coming in, and I told my friends, we need to see this guy. He's really funny. This is a few months after the news, with a Z, went off the air, and he had recently been in an episode of Friends. Maybe it was a two-parter, so that's what they mentioned in the poster, but I knew him from the news. So my buddies relented. They were dubious, but eventually decided to go with me to see Tommy Blaze. I've gone to comedy clubs since then. I've seen several stand-up routines, but this one is my absolute favorite. You know how you're laughing so hard that your face hurts and you're not sure when you'll be able to take your next breath, if ever? This was that kind of routine, but as much as my friends and I enjoyed it, I couldn't tell you a single one of his jokes today. Speaking of Nokia, my first cell phone was a Nokia 638 back in 1996. Big analog handset with a stubby antenna. I had a small business at the time doing on-site computer service, mostly for businesses, but also some residential. And I carried a pager. That's what you did back then. If you were a doctor or drug dealer or computer tech, you carried a pager. The basic one-line numeric display. But it was annoying to try to find a payphone whenever I got paged. And I didn't always have quarters with me to operate said payphone, so I got this instead. The cell phone store still had those big bag phones at the time. You remember the bag phones? Which they pushed a little bit. Maybe they're trying to get rid of them. But I wanted this one instead. It was a lot more compact, and I could, and did, hook it onto my belt. Hello, ladies. I moved on from that phone a year or two later, got a digital one because the analog static was pretty annoying. And I didn't have any brand loyalty at all. As I traded out phones over the years, there was one other Nokia, a little 8260, a tiny little thing, if I remember correctly. But yeah, no brand loyalty. I was all over the place. Ericsson, Motorola, Samsung, Sony, you name it. Except for Apple, not Apple. I was reading Engadget one day, the website, and I saw a device called the Nokia N900. It was a chubby little thing, but it ran Linux, like a full, honest Linux distro, a desktop system tray, everything, and it had a slide-out keyboard. The iPhone was on the market at this time, and the first-generation Android devices were appearing, but I bought this N900 instead, even though it was expensive. What did I pay, $600? But it was amazing in what it could do, so flexible. Broke my heart when it fell in the toilet 6 months later. Never recovered. The phone, not me, I got better. I couldn't afford another N900 at the time, but I had really gotten into Nokia. They had earned my trust with that N900, so I bought the cheapest, best Nokia phone I could find, which was the silver-clad E71. Loved that phone. It could do so much on so little hardware. When my coworkers complained about the company mail clients not running in the background on their iPhones, I showed off the E71's seamless multitasking. And there was nothing quite like a Nokia to pull in cell phone signal where I lived. They always had the best cell reception. So I was using that E71, but really interested in what would come after the N900, the next generation device. And when I saw the N9, I was initially disappointed. It didn't have the physical keyboard, didn't have a sliding camera cover that would automatically launch the camera app, didn't have a built-in kickstand or big stereo speakers or removable battery, all the things that the N900 had. Also, perhaps the biggest problem was that the N9 wasn't going to be released in the States, or the UK, or many other major markets. Secondary markets, though, South Africa, for example, did see a release, and I happened to be in Johannesburg right as the phone was getting ready for launch. I was staying at the Michelangelo Hotel, highly recommended, by the way, which was on Nelson Mandela Square, right next to the Michelangelo Towers Mall. The mall had a couple Nokia resellers, and I happened to be at one of them while a Nokia rep was there demonstrating the N9, and he was nice enough to let me borrow it for a minute. I tried out the things that I'd read about, the beautiful multitasking, the superb keyboard. Really, I've used many devices since, and none have a better on-screen keyboard in terms of tactile feedback, and the camera, which was faster than anything else on the market at the time. I played with it a little bit, then handed the phone back to the nervous rep, and knew that one of these was going to be my next cell phone. If I could have bought one right then, I would have. I think the exchange rate was pretty favorable. A reseller on Amazon came through a few months later on making an N9 available stateside. I'm not sure which country it was supposed to go to, Malaysia, maybe, but I got my hands on one, and it was everything I wanted it to be. This was early 2012. I worked very briefly with a guy from Finland, and he was a big Nokia fan too. There's a lot of national pride for Nokia, I think, which may explain why Cowboy Rodeo, a Finnish developer, published games on the relatively obscure Migo Hermatin platform that the N9 ran. I still use this phone, the N9, not as my regular cell phone anymore. Its web browsers are far too limited these days, but I use it for this podcast, as a matter of fact. I take pictures and video with the N9. My regular phone automatically uploads photos to the cloud, and I didn't want a whole bunch of screenshots up there, so I use the N9. I use it as a stopwatch when I'm timing things in games. That works well. And the N9 has the best social media interface I've ever seen. It has a built-in feature called the events list, and this can combine Facebook, Twitter, RSS feeds, even AP news stories in one single scrollable chronological list. None of that top stories nonsense, no algorithm deciding what I see and when, no hiding posts for whatever arbitrary reason the provider chooses, but an actual complete feed. I haven't seen any other software able to do this, which is a real shame. Also a shame is how the N9 was abandoned even before it launched, but that's a whole other story. I did eventually get a Nokia Windows 8 phone, use that for a little while since I hated the work-issued Android phone, and the Windows one could still talk to the corporate Exchange server without running all the corporate spyware that they wanted on the Android. And I did rather enjoy using it. It's no N9 or N900, but I think Windows 8 and Windows 10 were solid mobile platforms. These days, Nokia-branded phones are made by a company called HMD Global. This is a Finnish company, like right across the street from Nokia. These are Android devices, and there isn't one that I really liked. I prefer smaller devices. I have a Sony Xperia X Compact, and I like that one a lot. Maybe it'll run Sailfish someday, the spiritual successor to MeeGo on the N9. But in the meantime, my old E71 and my wife's old E5, she prefers phones with physical keyboards and used the E5 for a while. It's like a cheaper version of the E71. These two devices have new life working as sound machines. They play a continuous white noise loop at night. It's not much of a use, but it works well in that regard. I like Nokia, I guess, for many of the reasons that I like Atari. They were once the de facto standard. Everybody had a Nokia, or everybody had an Atari, different time periods, of course. And then they fell out of favor, but still came out with interesting products when most people had already written them off and moved on. And maybe, these companies might become a compelling name in their respective fields once more. But probably not.
Now Tommy Blaze the people. That's what it's all about.